There has been a little too much about what I'm going to do. I don't think it's actually that impressive, but we'll see. What I'm talking about is the journey into the cloud and basically what has worked and what hasn't for us. First of all, just as an agenda, about me and why I'm here, the first things I'm going to cover, I really want to get a level set so you guys understand why I was picked to talk about this. I'm then going to talk about my company, which you probably haven't heard of, our market, the product that we've developed in our history, which is then going to lead into adventures in Sas pricing. Now, Rick spoke a lot very similarly about what I'm going to talk about today, and I think there's a lot of compliment there, but also some new things. And I was actually very excited. It was my first time to see his presentation. I really liked it. After that, I'm going to talk about rolling our own entitlement system and how basically what Sentinel Cloud does to a degree, we built in-house as well, just like Rick did, and I have some demonstrations of that as well. I'm then going to do a Sentinel Cloud demo. So I was given access to this about a week ago, and I had a developer put it in, so we'll see how that goes and just kind of show you what it looks like, and then I'm going to end up with some final thoughts. First of all, a little bit about me. I am the CEO and a founder of a company called CenterCode. Originally, I was the CTO. I have more of a development background, kind of moved into a bit of product management. But I led the design of our software, and my primary background previous to that was web development. I worked for a company called Ericsson for a while, and I did a lot of web work there. I ran a web team as well. My big focus has always been usability and interface. I'm a big fan of the user experience. I really want things to be smooth across the board. I'm also a technology fanatic. I generally have just about every gadget on me, and I just love technology, both software and hardware, so it made a lot of sense for me to move into this business. As far as why me, when I was asked to do this, it turned into a very humbling experience. The way this kind of started was that Chris Holland, who's not here today, but I believe he's Jake's boss, is an old friend of mine. He worked with me at Ericsson. And about 10 years ago, he and I worked together, or about 12 years ago. And about 9 months ago, he called me and asked for some feedback on an interface for a product that SafeNet was working on. And I'd never heard of this product, of course. And it kind of pissed me off, because quite honestly, the product was what I was 90% through developing. Not as a product to release, but for our own needs. And we went through the whole build versus buy, couldn't find anything to buy, so we built. I'm going to be talking a lot about that throughout this presentation, but it was ultimately very clearly a waste of time. So that's kind of how this relationship started and where this went. I've spent about 10 years in the SaaS market since it was called ASP and no one knew what SaaS was. And above all, I've made just about every mistake possible. So to continue on with that story, once Chris decided that I would make a good case study for this, and he hooked me up with Jake, and Jake further concluded that, I worked with Jake on kind of what I was going to say here, and ultimately it came down to, holy crap, I've made a lot of mistakes. Pretty much everything that could have gone wrong, it feels like it did, and it was about halfway through this presentation that I actually started to learn some interesting things about that, so maybe that got better. We've also, as I said, we've built our own entitlement system, and we've had mixed results. We're actually very proud of what we have, and it's good, it works, it does its job, but it was a huge waste of time, caused some other problems, and still has lingering problems moving forward, so that's an issue. We're also now evaluating Sentinel Cloud as a result of this, so even though we made the build versus buy decision, that build never ends, it seems, so going to buy still may make a lot of sense, so I'm going to show you our progress on that. A little bit about us as a company. We were founded in 2001. We're the leaders in the beta test management space, which is a space you guys may or may not know exists. We have two offerings. We have CenterCode Connect, which is our SaaS cloud-based enterprise offering, and then we have managed betas, which are the professional service side of the company, and I'll talk a bit more in a few minutes about how we got to both of those. 100% of our revenue is B2B. We work with companies, a lot of really big companies. Some of you probably work for some of them, but our audience is both B2B and B2C, and I like this. I'm being a user interface and experience guy. I like audiences that care about interface, so being able to reach a wide audience is nice. I like that a lot. You've also heard of most of our customers, and as I said, some of you probably work for some of them. And we're growing, we're doing okay, but we're not wildly successful. And it's kind of hard to come up and talk about your company when you don't have the hockey stick story to tell. You know, we're in business, and I'll again go into the history of that, but we're not a $100 million company, and we don't have the happy ending that I assume Boomi does with Dell. So there was a lot of learning lessons here, and I don't have all the answers, but I do have a lot of stories. As for our customers, this is a small list. It's actually much bigger, but this is some of the types of companies we deal with. And these are companies that care about the quality of their products, obviously, and they invest in us to help make them better. So this is just a selection, and obviously you've heard for a lot of them, and a lot of them are just down the street here. Few of our accomplishments. One of the big companies we've worked with for a very long time is Adobe. Everybody knows them and uses Acrobat and Flash and whatnot, and they've ran over 700 projects on our software, and it's still going strong. We also provided Adobe Japan with the first fully Japanese beta portal, which a good chunk into our history we decided localization was important and therefore went through all of those roles. We've also worked with Autodesk extensively, and they're, at any given time, they've got about 90 product managers who are using our system throughout the year. We've ran over 100 beta tests for Logitech, so if you're using one of their mice or keyboards or webcams, chances are we had our hands in it. And we have just over a 90% annual renewal rate as well, which in the software subscription business is obviously important, so we're very proud of that. As far as usage goes, we have over 700,000 end users using the product. We've collected over 5,000 pieces of feedback, such as bug reports, 900,000 surveys, and over 125 million email have been sent, everything from recruiting beta testers to alerting them to the status of their bugs and so on. A little bit about our market. Everybody in here is in technology, I assume, so chances are you know what a beta test is, but as kind of a level set in our language, it's a product test by real customers in real environments, and what we're doing is we're separating it from QA. We're not talking about outsourced QA processes. What we're talking about is getting real customers involved in improving the quality of your product, helping your product planning, and of course validating the real-world performance. It applies primarily to technology and obviously hardware and software. It goes a bit outside that, but that is primarily where we look at. As far as the unique challenges of our business and basically what we address, anybody who's participated from the company side of a beta or ran one before will probably agree with a few, if not all of these. First of all, recruiting targeted beta testers that meet the market of your product is really challenging. Managing that participation, you know, the average participation rates on betas are generally about 30%, meaning you give out 100 of a product or 100 licenses of a product, maybe 30 are actually going to meet the goals you set out for them. Obviously, a lot of time wasted there, a lot of money. Keeping feedback relevant throughout the beta and not just a bunch of ideas to how to make your product better, but rather keeping it online with the goals. Big problem. Organizing and distributing that feedback, making sure that things aren't falling through the cracks, also a big problem. And then allocating qualified resources to actually work with those beta testers, to work with the beta in general, is an issue. So these are the things that we kind of look at as the source of inspiration for developing our software as well as our services. So a little bit about that product. Our product's called Center Code Connect. It's a complete SaaS-based platform for managing every single aspect of a beta test. Our goal is to produce shorter beta tests with fewer participants and better results. It's pretty simple. But in execution, it's not. There's an enormous amount of components to our tool. Many components sold on their own are just one little piece of our tool. So things like feedback management and bug tracking and surveys and tasks and wikis and forums and content and so on. And behind this, kind of shadowed in the back, is just a piece of our feature list from this year. And being an enterprise tool that has to reach a wide variety of needs, this is what we deal with. So from a SaaS licensing perspective, this gives us a lot of moving parts to think about. The other thing that we're big on, and this goes to Rick's message earlier, is integrations. We wouldn't be where we were or where we are today if we didn't integrate with a bunch of existing systems. So the ability to talk to things like Active Directory and OpenID and Jira, which is a personal favorite of mine, Bugzilla, Rational Stuff, Akamai, these are the types of things that we need to coexist with, because when we get into a company, we don't want to replace these types of systems. We're not trying to say we have our own. So every tool I talked about a minute ago is in addition to integrating with their own existing systems as well. So it's very, very important, and I'll be talking more about that as well. I assume we have some technical folks in the room, so I thought I'd talk a little bit about what powers our tool. It is built on the .NET and ASP platform. We've got about 500,000 lines of code. It's built on SQL Server with over 500 tables and 1,000 stored procedures calling the shots. And I said this in my last presentation, and I'm always leery about it. We're actually, to be perfectly honest, not a huge fan of these technologies. We were back 10 years ago when we started, and it's been kind of a legacy issue. We would actually rather be on an open source platform at this point, but it just doesn't honestly make business sense to do so. The licensing here is a little more expensive, and it doesn't quite do everything the way we want, but it works, and it works well for the most part. We put 100,000 man hours into this, and everything's been done in-house. So we obviously own our own IP, and everything's been done with our staff, and we do work off an agile development model as well, and we're huge fans of that. A little bit about our infrastructure today, and a lot of people don't necessarily talk about the back end of their tools, and my goal is to be as transparent as possible today. I'm pretty open to most of it. Being that we've been around for a long time, we have a number of models that to some degree we get to deal with, and we get to roll them all up into an entitlement system that works across the board. Otherwise, it's kind of a waste of time. So what you can get an idea here kind of from the top is obviously we have the cloud and some firewall. On the left-hand side, where we have current, this is how we do things today. We have shared application servers. We can pop as many of those in as we need. We then have shared database servers, each one of them with a number of databases. And we actually chose to go the route of different databases per customer, albeit entirely scripted, for security purposes. And actually, what Rick said for Boomi was pretty awesome as well. I actually liked the way he's doing it. But this is what we did, and we're actually pretty happy with it. It allows us for a heavy level of automation, and we do get to keep the data separation that our customers really want and insisted on in a lot of cases. So this is a very scalable thing that we have here, and we can do a lot with it very easily. On the right-hand side, we have the legacy, which I'll be talking in a few minutes about kind of the mistakes we made in legacy and what steps we took. But we do have a couple servers left where the web app and the database server are dedicated in a single server, which made sense for those implementations, as well as ones, some of the bigger ones, that have private database and private web apps as well. And again, I'll be talking about why and how we sold some of these. So a little bit about our history. In 2001, I had a need. As I said, I worked for Ericsson, and I was tasked with running a beta test. And to this day, I honestly don't know why. I ran the web group, and somebody figured that beta tests happen online, therefore the web manager should have a say in that. I went and tried to outsource it immediately because I didn't want to do it. It sounded like a complete pain in the ass, to be honest. So in looking to outsource it, it turned out there were extremely few solutions to be able to accomplish it. In reality, there was only one company out there that was doing it. They were very well venture funded. We worked with them, didn't like the experience, so I decided that I would go do something similar. So I decided to start a company that would develop software to help companies run beta tests. And this really fit into some personal goals I had. What I wanted to do was help companies build better products. Ultimately, like I said, user experience is a passion of mine in relation to technology, so this seemed like a good company for me to start, something I would stick to. So I convinced 3 friends that it was good enough to start a company on, and 3 of them, including myself, were developers, and then we had one kind of business guy, and we entirely bootstrapped this. We didn't raise money to do this. This was something we wanted to do on our own, in part because we wanted to control our own destiny, but more importantly because it was 2001 and no one was giving out money. The initial strategy is that we were going to target small companies. We didn't exactly plan to go after the enterprise, and there was 4 key reasons for this. One, we were a couple guys in my apartment, and we didn't think any companies would give us money of any size. Also, there was already, as I said, a well-funded company that was servicing big companies. They had expensive price tags, and everything seemed to make sense. We didn't like how they were servicing big companies, but they were, so that seemed like a good rationale. Also, small companies needed fewer features, which meant we could get to market faster with something that would fit their needs a lot easier than the enterprise. And then also, smaller companies need beta testing too. Anyone developing software or hardware theoretically needs a beta, so why not target the small guys since there was literally no solution? The reality is that to reach small companies, you need to throw a net. In other words, you need good marketing. And you saw my list of guys, 3 developers and a business guy. We didn't have any marketing, nor did we have any money to pay for that net. In 2011, that's a lot easier to do than it was in 2001, so that was just a big problem for us. We had no money, and ultimately what we needed was a lot of luck. And we found it shortly after. Our first software customer was Sun Microsystems, and they found us online with our little crappy 2001 website. We offered the software not even complete to our own 1.0 version at $300,000 with a 20% annual maintenance fee. This was a complete wild guess, and from this point on, you're going to start to see some trends here that I'm not exactly proud of. But we kind of made that number up on the fly, and there was reasons we did that, and I still don't necessarily think I had a better way, and if somebody here has a better way, I'd be open to it. But it was a complete wild guess, and we probably should have said a lot more because they bought it without questioning the price at all. And they also loved it, and they used it up until the time Oracle purchased them, in which case they were forced to use Oracle-based systems. So now on to the adventures in Sas pricing. First of all, pricing is really hard. Anybody who's dealt with it, I believe that Rick said that they spent as much time on the product, and I had to laugh at that because I think we did too. But pricing without competition is really, really hard. And when he sat down next to me, that was the first thing I said, is he went his path, and a lot of it was based on the fact that they had 100 other companies trying to do integration, and he was trying successfully, it sounds like, to out-innovate them in a lot of ways, and that's great. I didn't have that problem. I didn't have any competition. I had something that very clearly seemed like a need, but we were 4 guys forging an entirely new product category, which generally no one wants to do, and there's good reasons for that. So pricing without competition and any sort of market value like that is very hard. Pricing without capital is really, really hard because we have to support ourselves, which means we basically turn ourselves into a niche if we don't do it right. So we tried a lot of models as a result of that, and I'm now going to get pretty detailed on exactly what those are. So this is kind of the transparent part. From 2002 to 2004, when we actually introduced this thing, we were a perpetual model, meaning we were selling for $300,000 and 20% annually. We were still effectively in the cloud, or whatever it would have been called then. We weren't on-premise, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we were selling it just with a maintenance fee. It was unlimited usage, it was hosted, and it had a dedicated server. But ultimately, this was a bit of a Trojan horse for us. And what the reason is because it was a very limited audience, and we only signed 2 customers in 2 years. And the reason for that is to sell at this price for our solution, it requires a very large centralized group running beta tests, which is something that companies like Sun and ultimately Adobe and a few others have. But most companies have individual product groups doing it for themselves, or QA groups or whatever. It's not a big centralized, well-funded thing. So the problem was that our sales organization was very, very slow to react. They saw the fact that $300,000 was something somebody bought without question, and I call that a Trojan horse because we looked at that and said, well, then 100 other companies will do that as well, and we were very slow to adapt to that. A recent realization that I made that was the saddest thing, and it came late last year, was that every single model we have tried ever since has been based on this price. And you're going to see them moving out. And again, Boomi said they've been raising their prices. We haven't really been raising or lowering our prices per se. What we've been doing is changing our model so that we always somehow have this price as its ancestor. And we did that for a number of reasons, and we didn't have a lot of choices, and I'll be talking about that. But it's kind of a nightmare, and it's kind of depressing to say. From 2005 to 2006, we went to a more flat subscription model of instead of $300,000 down and $60,000 a year, we're going to move to a flat $120,000 a year. Again, unlimited usage, hosting, dedicated server. As you can see, in the SaaS world, that's effectively the same price. After a few years, if you're sticky, it comes out to be about the same, and that's how we justified it to sales. We were very, I was CTO at the time, we were very afraid of sales for some reason. The team, not the concept. So we did slightly better with this. We had about 5 accounts in 2 years, and keep in mind the money's starting to pile up just in the sense that we do have subscription revenue, and we had a service business as well, so things were working out, but it wasn't obviously growing like wildfire. The problem is that this was still wrong. It was still relying on very large centralized groups to buy, because ultimately it was the same price in an unlimited usage model. We just told them it was, $200,000 cheaper because we played the SaaS card. 2007 to 2008, it changed again. This time we went down to seat-based at $25,000 a piece per annual admin seat. Now we still are hosted, but we're on shared servers, and we have usage limits. The funny thing, again, the price is based on, okay, well, if Symantec needed 5 seats at $125,000, there you go, $25,000 per seat. The idea was we can widen our audience, so we were now getting away from those large centralized teams, but ultimately it was still the same price. We also had a strong sales push to push extra services on top of customers, which in this software business isn't necessarily a good thing at times. So we signed about 10 more accounts, averaging about 2 seats apiece. So we did widen our market in the fact that it got cheaper. But again, we're not talking hockey stick here. We're talking fairly slow growth being fueled by the fact that we're subscription, which was actually working out okay. Problem being, it's too expensive still for most companies. While it did work in that it was a lower entry point, it was then too expensive to scale for a number of companies. So it was closer, but it wasn't really flexible enough. In 2009 and to 2010, we then went with the editions model. Again, I had to laugh earlier because they did something similar. So we split into an enterprise edition and a standard edition and designed each one basically around the target audiences that we were trying to reach. We also had something which we considered to be a maintenance mode where somebody could switch to what was called a community edition for a very low price. And the idea here is that if you're a smaller organization and you're not running beta tests year-round, but you need the benefits of a year-round portal to continue to build a pool of users, then they could pay less in that downtime. The problem was it was too many moving parts. It was confusing. It made the sales process longer. There was just a lot of issues, and it was just completely a pain. But each license was effectively a kit. This was another interesting challenge we had to deal with, is the fact that there's a lot of different audiences facing our product. We have people applying to beta tests, which is thousands of people. We have participants, which is hundreds, internal team members, which may be in the 10s or 20s or more, and then project managers who are actually running the show. And we have to account for all of those in some way. So we built a kit to where each license, enterprise includes 500 participants, whatever. So it's ultimately seat-based. Each one includes one project manager, and then those rest of those audiences follow through. The problem we discovered here is that the pricing was still off. It was effectively too high for some and too low for others, meaning we were targeting two markets but not very effectively. It also, just as a model, and I've already talked about the community editions and the kits and so on, it was just too many moving parts. One of the things about SaaS that everybody likes is that you've got all this metering and monitoring, and you can do all kinds of crazy things with that. The problem being you can do all kinds of crazy things with that. You can just go nuts, build in 50 moving parts, and make it look like they're paying for exactly what they're getting. But it can be very, very confusing. It's not predictable, and there's all sorts of problems that come as a result of that. So we tried to get rid of as many moving parts as we could. So 2011, this year, we've tweaked our editions model. We're still keeping editions. We think they're a good idea. But it's now 10,000 for the bottom, 20,000 above that, and we have discount schedules moving up that are just appropriate for each one. We're also much more aggressive with annual discounts, and this is something that has proven very successful just in the last few months. That if we offer the standard plan of, you can pay monthly or you get 2 months for free if you go annual, so it's 10 times the monthly price, it's both easy to explain, and anybody who goes through a free trial and likes your product will generally take annual over monthly at that point. And that's just something that has proven true. And for a small company looking to get revenue in the door earlier so we can reinvest, that's a very good thing. So that's turned out pretty well. It also has fewer moving parts and fewer limits, and this is another problem that we had when we built those kits and we decided how many participants they could have versus applicants. A lot of that was over fear of scaling issues from our engineering group. They were determined that if we had too many applicants that it would cause problems. Part of that was low visibility. When we didn't have an entitlement system to actually see what people were doing, then we just had all sorts of fears that ultimately became unjustified. So once we went and improved what was actually happening, the law of averages actually worked out really well for us, meaning some customers had just a few participants and that was perfect for them. Some had many thousands. We never really needed to license that. We could have left it in the middle and actually priced around the value that they care about, which is generally not participants. We also want fewer support services because we want to enable success right out of the box. We want things like templates and documentation to just be so easily accessible that they don't need to pay for services or we don't need to cost out services. And along with that just comes more automation across the board, and I'll be talking about that. The sad part, of course, is that we still very, very much fear cannibalization. Over half of our revenue today comes from subscription, and that is half of our revenue as an entire company, services, software combined. The subscription business alone that comes in is more than half the money we bring in, which means any change we make threatens some of that in a big way. So what we're doing now, while we work out that problem, is focusing on reducing costs, because reducing costs doesn't change that problem. Okay, on to rolling our own entitlement system, which this really gets relevant from this point on. First of all, as we transitioned from the seat-based license model, like many dumb companies before us, we left license management and entitlement entirely on paper. We were used to dealing with huge, respectable companies that we assumed if they signed something saying they were buying 5 licenses that they would only use 5 licenses. And it was a handshake agreement at best, really. And when you start out selling unlimited licenses, you don't have to think about those things. If you introduce them, then it's something to pay attention to. So this was a huge mistake, one of the biggest we've ever made. And after studying it through a lot of manual work, because we didn't have a system, it turned out that over 85% of our customers were actually abusing their licenses. And when I say abusing, and someone referenced this example earlier, I had a customer who purchased 5 project manager seats, was using around 120. And that sucks, and it's a problem, and it was across the board. So we were leaving a lot of money on the table, and that excuse gets thrown around, or that phrase gets thrown around over and over, and it's totally true. The other thing that gets thrown at, and everybody who presents seems to say this in some way, we were also just setting ourselves up for very, very uncomfortable conversations. You don't want to go to a company who's spending $50,000 a year on you and say, hey, by the way, you owe us $400,000 next year because you broke the model. That's never going to happen. It's just you've got so many issues. It's uncomfortable. It's not a good customer experience at all. And it's just a problem. And we set ourselves up for that problem. So we developed something called SIM. This is our Connect Implementation Management tool. It's a centralized system for our automation and our management of all of our implementations and our licenses. I'm going to show a few pieces of it here. few benefits across the board that this does for us. It benefits my engineering team by making new customer provision something that is easily done by support or theoretically even sales staff or automatically via API. And what I mean is previous to this system, if we needed a new implementation set up, someone would shoot an email to engineering and they'd put 15 minutes of work into it. It wasn't a big deal. It was all scripted, but there wasn't a UI surrounding it. We didn't have all those kinds of things. So ultimately, it was just distracting. Now it's a matter of either filling out a simple form or using some web service to make it happen. It also benefits our support staff, who can now log into any of our customer implementations, and we have a whole new security model around this, which I'll talk about in a minute, but they can now support their customers much easier. From a sales perspective, it gives full visibility of account usage down to the individual feature level. It also allows me to enforce broader goals on growth in sales because our sales department now has the ability to go see what people are doing and adjust their tactics accordingly. From a product planning perspective, which is my personal favorite, it allows me to, across my customers, see exactly what features they're using. It also allows me to see what they're not using. And something that became a favorite of mine in the last year is removing features from our tool. And in the on-premise world, you can we would take this for granted. You can't necessarily do that. You don't know exactly what people are using. It's a lot of homework. If I put feelers into my tool that tell me nobody's used a specific feature in 12 months, then I'm probably safe to get rid of it. And the reason I would want to do this is because every time we add a new feature, we have to think about how it interacts with every other feature. So de-investing in things that just aren't hip anymore is very valuable to us. So we've already had it happen, I think, 3 times in the last year to where there were just little things that were a good idea years ago that just don't make sense in the context of today, and we got to get rid of them, and that saves us a lot of time moving forward. The other thing we did with this system is completely integrate it with our own backend of just how we run our little small business backend. And we use a few systems pretty regularly. The first here is Recurly. Recurly is a billing system. It's an automated subscription management system that we're big fans of, very API-based, so we can integrate into our billing so that if somebody buys online, it sets up everything, handles the subscription for us, and then SIM sets up the actual implementation. We also use a tool called Yammer, which some of you might be familiar with. It's become popular in the last year. It's basically Twitter for the business or Twitter for the enterprise. It allows you to have a stream of information that's relevant and secured to the inside of the company. What we do here is just announce every new implementation so people have a general idea of what's going on. When deals are closed, as long as they hit a certain threshold, they automatically get announced in Yammer. This is just a good example of a cool integration that one of our engineers did in his spare time. It took about 30 minutes of work. It was a simple API call from SIM. It was actually the guy who developed most of SIM because he didn't want sales to have to announce all of these. In reality, he just stole their thunder. They have nothing to talk about on Yammer anymore, but that's what engineering does. We then added Zerigo, which is a company that handles DNS management. This is just one of those little technical things. All of our domains get custom domains if they want them, and we used to have to send a bunch of email and do a bunch of things to make that happen. About 4 hours of API work, and that was gone. Zendesk is another good example. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Zendesk. It's, again, just one of the recently hip services out there for doing help desk support. We're huge fans of it, and one of the cool things it allows us to do is set up shared help desks automatically for any of our customers. So a good example, like I said, Autodesk has about 90 product managers active within our tool. We've set it up so that if Autodesk were to purchase, it automatically sets up a little effectively what's a sandbox for Autodesk in Zendesk that anybody from there who logs in will see all of the issues related to Autodesk. So if their coworkers are reporting issues that they might be having issues with regarding integrations or something like that, they can see them all, and it's no work on our part. This is all automated. The next thing we're doing is integrating it with a tool called Entitlement, which is our upcoming CRM system. We're currently on Salesforce, but we're moving off of it and onto Entitlement very soon. So once we get through the API work there, we're going to integrate both project management and the actual sales process as part of it. So just how this works from a high level. This is quick overview of our implementation process. You can either log into the UI as an employee or via API from either Recurly or soon Entitlement. So create a simple form or automate that form, which then sends a specific data to provision a new database with some metadata in SIM. It then tells Yammer about the new deal. It tells Zerigo to set up the DNS. It tells Helpdesk to set up the Zendesk to set up the shared Zendesk. It emails out instructions to the customer. They can self-configure by filling out a single form, and they're live. So what used to be a lot of work and a lot of moving parts and a lot of email is now not. From an infrastructure perspective, this is similar to what I showed you earlier, but now I've got the back end. I've got a SIM server sitting behind all of it on our network. We have daily reports coming from each system that is giving us 200 or so integers, letting us know what's going on with all the individual features in our tool. And of course, we developed a simple little function library that we can use to basically wrap that around any feature that we want reported on. And it's constantly telling SIM, in this case once a day, what happened that previous day. And we get current to date as well as daily figures on everything that we can then do whatever analytics we want. We also have then entitlement updates pushed from SIM. So we just log into SIM, give someone 2 more licenses, and immediately pushes that out to their implementation. It's transparent. Something I didn't show, I thought about it after my first demo, but I didn't get a chance to update it, is we've also then done the other side of this to where our product now integrates with SIM to report any type of usage to the end users as well, so they can see exactly how much they're using right within our product. So that's the good story. Now we have the downfalls of SIM, and I chose this graphic because anybody who ever played Mousetrap as a child, it's an awesome idea. You feel like you're practically inventing something, but then it never works. So this is what SIM was to us eventually. First of all, it was 6 months of work to get it done, and it was a little more than this realistically. I had one guy dedicated to it, other people helping, everybody helping, design work, QA work, but it came out to about 6 months of work, and the devil is really in the details. It sounded simple to me at the time to develop this system, but then you think, okay, if I want to delete an implementation, what's the whole path for that? And ultimately, this is the reason middleware exists, because all those little things you don't want to think about. It sounds really easy to me from the outside to develop this, but once we get into all the details, it's an enormous amount of work for development, design, and QA. We also had 2 light releases of our product, which really sucks. I was really unhappy about this, and when we were going through release notes and I was looking at them, I didn't even make the connection the first time I looked at these release notes that I was unhappy with, and I was like, what have we been doing for all this time? And of course, my engineer immediately points out we were developing SIM. I was like, crap, that doesn't translate to value for my customers. And this was a while ago, and it was, again, kind of embarrassing at the moment. And then we're like struggling to make our release notes look better than they are, which is even worse. Yeah, try and describe like a simple performance increase in a page and a half. It's troubling. So we got into realizing very, very quickly that what we've done now, and we're now infinitely doing, is slowing down the progress of our primary product, which is where we generate revenue, which is what we care about. Now, we solved some problems regarding leaving money on the table, but those aren't problems that show value to my end users. They don't keep me relevant. And this was mentioned earlier, and it's very, very true. We also now had a new security model to support. And I haven't stressed this today, but I'm not a fan of the technical aspects of security. I'm a product designer, and we like to think high-level. Security is a very low-level thing. So I have amazing people on my staff who are really, really good at security, and now they have another thing they have to think about across the board, which kind of sucks. It's also just a new product to develop and support. It has bugs, it has issues, it has new things that were in the original design that got stripped that we now want, but we don't have scheduled, and we just don't have resources. And earlier the phrase used was a side job, and that's exactly what it is. This is an evening and weekend job, which we don't need. It's also, as I've said over and over, it's not our core competency. It never was. It didn't make a lot of sense, but at the time we couldn't find a solution. And it's just never flexible enough, and that's where I'm going to roll into the actual demo of what we wanted to solve that we couldn't. And to do that, I want to talk a little bit about what we have in and what our limitations are and kind of where we screwed up. We have 2 different types of entitlement that we can do. We have Boolean-based entitlement, which is effectively toggling features on and off. Things like, can they access cross-project reporting, which is a feature that makes a lot of sense for our Enterprise Edition, because these are people who run lots of projects, but makes no sense at all and is just a support complication for our Standard Edition, because they don't run a lot of products. Also, missing features are completely hidden from the tool, always. We don't have the ability to use that as an upsell, like it's been brought up a couple times today. It's just part of the design. We do have about 50 different things we can turn on or off, and that's very easy to add more, so we're very happy about that. There's a lot of them, which does give us a lot of moving parts, but again, there's some inherent limitations. We also have concurrency-based entitlement, meaning we can limit access to various things to a numeric value. We can say, they can have 10 active projects. They can have 100 active participants. If they need more, delete some or theoretically buy more. What we can't do, in the example I'm going to walk through in a moment, is if they just want to buy 10 projects, we can't do that. And that's something that a lot of customers want to do because they associate the value with running a project. And that value feature alignment is something that we really missed in designing this. So same things apply. Need more, delete some. And again, we have about 25 of these built in. So the real limitation is we have no count up or count down metering, meaning, like I said, I can't sell 10 projects. And we've been facing this more and more, in part because we actually recently purchased a competitor, and that was how they were licensing. So going into dealing with their customers, we were hoping we could license in a similar model to reduce some friction there, and we just couldn't. It's an engineering problem. It would then put back more Connect builds and just cause all sorts of problems. And out of all the things that that company we acquired was doing, that was the thing we liked the most when it came down to actually talking to customers. So substantial development would be required to support this. More than a few customers do really want it now because it really does align with the value of how they budget, which is very important. And it just makes sense. It was a miss due to legacy ways of thinking. So just to kind of demonstrate an example here of why this is a problem to us, our workaround for this, if they want to solve this problem, is to just license our product monthly. If they have, say, 10 products throughout the year, but when they don't know when they're going to run them and things like that, and they could overlap, so licensing becomes an issue, this was our idea, is you could just license it monthly, which you can see in month 1 they'd need 3 licenses, month 2, 2, 1 after that, and so on. What this works out to is that at any given time there's a minimum of 1, a maximum of 3, an average of 2, and a total of 13. The problem is that none of those numbers are in line with 5, and 5 is where they see their value. They have 5 different products they're trying to test, they have 5 different budgets they're trying to put together, whatever it is, 5 is the number that they want to license around, and it's just something that we don't have the ability to do. So we're just not aligned with the value. So now I'm going to do the demo of how we got to being aligned with that value. The challenge here was to add a project-based entitlement system or a mechanism to Connect using Sentinel Cloud. So simple challenge I gave to a developer. One guy spent 1 day getting it functional enough to demo to me. I then critiqued the hell out of it, made him change every string, and it took about another day for polish. What actually changed was 3 new lines of code got put into existing files. 1 new function got written, which is right there. It was about 20 lines of code, and we were referencing a .NET example web service that was given to us that we didn't have to change. And this is all we did. So there was a question earlier about what actually changed, what had to be changed. It was very little, to the point where this probably shouldn't have taken a day, probably should have taken an hour. So now it's demo time, and hopefully my internet works better than Jake's. So the first thing I'm going to do is log into our tool, and I'm going to show you just how I might go about creating a project. So for this case, I have 1 project available to me, so we're going to go ahead and do that very quickly, assuming the internet works. And it does. Good deal. So okay, this is our tool. This is just a complete demo site. So in this case, I have my community level and I have my individual project level. Right now I'm at the community level. And what I want to do as a project manager is I want to go create a new project. So I'm going to click my new project button. And my slow internet is going to take time to think. Then I'm going to say SafeNet Demo 1. I can pretty much ignore everything else. We have the ability to choose a different theme. Most of our sites are branded for the customer's own branding. I could choose a language if I have multiple language sets available, and I can, of course, choose a template. One of the nice things about our system from a beta perspective is generally every beta is a little bit different, but they all have a core foundation. So we have a project template capability where people can save everything, their reports, their feedback types, their surveys. Everything can be saved to be reusable, and they can just tweak those as need be. So in this case, I'm just going to use a simple basic project, and I'm now going to clone that into a new project. So what this is going to do is go look at probably 100 or so tables, and it's going to clone all that information piece by piece over the course of 10 steps. Generally takes a few seconds here. And then I'm going to have a brand new project ready to go. So I'm licensed for this. I'm allowed to do it. It's churning through, and it will soon be there. Of course, I could have chosen a blank one, which would have been near instant, but I didn't do that. And I meant to fix this last night. My theme has a weird little IE issue that is part of my demo theme that I didn't fix because I don't use IE. Trying to convert Jake to Chrome. It's not going well. So here we go. I now have a project. It's good to go, but let's say I now want to create another one because I'm in the business of creating 2 betas right now because I have 2 products coming out. So what I'm going to do is go back to the same link. I'm going to click New Project again, and hopefully it's going to tell me that I can't. Basically, it's saying no projects available. Please contact your account manager. It gives me a link to do that. It could be a buy it now process using our whole recurly system. But in this case, I'm just going to go over to EMS because I have my own admin account, and I'm just going to entitle myself to use more. Okay. Now, I actually did not take part in developing any of this. I just kind of told him what I would like him to do, and he did it, and I was trained on it at about 4 in the morning, so I'm hoping I still remember all of it. So I'm going to go over to Entitlements. I'm going to let that load. Are you loaded? I'm going to hit New. I am then going to say, this is an enterprise license. I am the contact. Maybe. Or not. Sorry, I'm not good at trackpads. Please select me. Okay. I'll pick my email and submit that. It now loads. I'm going to say, yes, that is Enterprise Connect. I would like, instead of concurrent, I would just like to add single project license. And I'm going to submit that. I am now going to commit that. Yes, I would like it committed. I'm only making one change, so we're good. I'm then going to go back to connect. I'm going to go back home. I could just refresh this page, but I'll just show the process. Down a little bit. I'm going to create a new project. And there we go. So that is using their backend. It's pulled in. I can create another project. I can give myself as many entitlements as I want. And it was a day of integration. So from the perspective of how hard this is to get into a tool, it's very easy. Now, I can also point out that it's a little bit easier because we already built the hooks in to build our own, which I think is actually a pretty strong message for anybody that's already started down the path. Replacing it is even easier, and that's very core to us. We did invest a lot of time, but based on my engineer's theories of the 6 months we spent on that, probably would have been about a month into this. And I was actually trying to get a quote out of him, but nothing he said made any sense. So it was, or would have filled an entire slide. So I just went with an example demo instead. So going back to finish up a couple more here. This was the most challenging thing of this entire thing to do. Like I said, I called Jake halfway through this, and I was like, oh crap, I'm never going to be able to do this. All I'm going to do is walk up there and say what a jackass I am, and it's going to be terrible. But halfway through, it was like, holy crap, I've learned something, and it felt good, to be honest. So these are the 10 takeaways I have for this. And like it started as 3, then it hit 5, and then I was up to 7, and eventually I pulled 10, and at some point it was 12, and we'll probably get to those in the panel. So these are what I consider to be the most important things that I have here. And there's been plenty of other mistakes made at CenterCode in sales and marketing and everything else, but that's a different conference. So for now, first of all, as if I haven't made this clear enough, be extra careful with your early pricing model. We were a tiny company that couldn't invest in any kind of research. We had no money. But if you're a company with some sort of budget for that, invest it. Find out what this is worth. Look at your competition, which again we didn't have, because subscription cannibalization is a haunting thing. And even if you're a big enough company to be able to afford to cannibalize yourself in seek of elasticity, it's a topic that will always be there. It will haunt you. It scares you. It's just not a good thing. So be very careful when pricing the product. Also, learn exactly who your customer is. One of the first things I said is that we were targeting these big companies with centralized beta groups, and that really wasn't the way that most big companies ran their betas. We got many more huge customers by not focusing on that, by seeking out individual product managers and quality managers and such. So learn exactly who and where your customer is. Don't just assume that it's the same person that it always was or that you always thought it was. This one hopefully is very, very obvious. Everybody's saying it, and it's a no-brainer. Don't leave licensing on paper. It's, again, one of the biggest mistakes we've ever had. It was terrible. It caused all sorts of problems, and it's not good. The uncomfortable conversations, just to give you a point, some of them were so uncomfortable we haven't had them yet, and this was a year ago. Meaning, and again, some of you probably work for these companies. There's a couple customers out there that it was just so wild that what they were doing was so crazy in regards to our licensing, but we knew they couldn't justify what it would cost. And it was already established, and people can't generally go to their CFO and say, hey, remember that thing I bought? I now need 8 times that to do what we're doing. That just doesn't happen. So we've sort of let it slide under under the principle of we screwed up the model. It's more us than them. And that is kind of the truth, is not only did we make the mistake of leaving it on paper, but we didn't build a model, quite honestly, that actually fit their needs. That whole 5 up to 200 isn't really that pricing scale doesn't really make sense for them. They're not getting that much value. As much as I love my tool, they're not getting what I consider to be, $500,000 of value. It's just not what it is. Also, just reduce the friction. While we love the message of SaaS having all these moving parts and there's a lot to study, that doesn't mean you should use them all. Every extra moving part is going to cause sales friction. It's going to cause questions. Those questions might be confusion for your own salespeople at times, which has been a big problem for us, is that we've changed so many things at so many times that even they get lost, which then translates to the customers being completely lost. Also, always align the price to the value. Like I said, one problem is that we have a lot of customers who see the value in being the individual projects. If they run 5 or 10 beta tests, that's where they see the value. Make that easy for them. You want to sell in the way that they see the value, which is metered in some cases. It's different for everybody, but it's important to know. Also, study your usage closely. We spent the first few years not really studying. I did ask queries to be ran and certain things to happen here and there, but in reality, once we had SIM and we could study it so closely, we've made amazing decisions that have made last year much, much better. So it was very positive. Also, use the law of averages to your advantage. This is something that we took far too long to accept. We looked at too many fear points of, okay, if they use too many of this, it's going to bog down the servers, it's going to cause a huge issue. But in reality, more than half of them used far too little of it, and it just worked out. It was less friction, it was better value, it just worked. Also react quickly. Something I didn't mention, and again, it's one of the embarrassing things, is how long it took us to move from one model to another. We spent 4 years on models that, from the CTO perspective, I was saying just don't work, but we were all afraid of sales and their experience, and we didn't react quickly enough. Also, integrate everywhere. Hopefully this is preaching Boomi's message a little bit, but in the cloud, integration matters, and it matters a lot, and it's easy to do. You want to integrate with as many tools as possible so that it's as transparent as possible. As I said, we would not have nearly the amount of customers we did if we couldn't integrate with things like Jira, which really make a lot of sense for them. Also, focus on your core competency. It's the oldest business lesson in the book, and it's something that we've learned in 20 different places. But entitlement obviously was not our core competency. It probably is not yours. It is obviously the core message of the Sentinel system, and I completely promote using it for that sense. It just does not make sense to develop your own system unless there's some crazy reason that you even have to. And if you do, at least do something. Don't leave it on paper. So thank you to SafeNet for the opportunity. Thanks to everyone here for showing up. Also, just best of luck in the cloud. I hope everyone here does work out a cloud solution, because personally, that's all I use, and I love them. I don't have any servers for any on-premise software at CenterCode, and I'm very happy about that fact. It's great. And that's it. And we can either panel or questions. I'll also pre-explain something kind of weird. Last night was the first night in probably 6 months I've got 8 hours of sleep. And as of this week, hanging out with these guys and just doing the stuff in Boston and everything, I got about 3 hours a night for 4 days straight. Which I think is why my last presentation was probably a little more energetic than this one. I had just reached the point of crazy, and I'm now past that, and I'm back to somewhat normal. So I'll have to get back to crazy and stop sleeping when I get home again. Questions? No, good.